All right, so you are here, hopefully, to learn about how to be successful with your projects. And really, this idea, you can apply this in your personal life. You can apply it in non-tech. I mean, the idea is that you want to hold yourself and your team accountable by some sort of standard that you come up with together. So if I said, you know what, my wife and I want to move to Canada, what does success look like? So we talk about it, we plan for it, and then we can measure it as we go along the way to see, do we need to change our plans if something unexpected happens? But we're mostly related to digital and the web here, so let's kind of frame it based on that. So the idea here is that we want to define KPIs, which is such a frequent word used, but more frequently than not, people are thinking vanity metrics like page views, bounce rates. I mean, these are things that by themselves, without any context, you don't know. Is that from a robot? So let's go ahead and get into it. Of course, sponsors for the summit. Without them, we couldn't do what we're doing. So just want to acknowledge them. And of course, I'm Chad Hester. I've been doing this sort of work for about 25 years. Seems like it hasn't been that long, but I have to admit that to myself. I've been working with the open source community since about 2008. Very happy to have moved on from my Microsoft development career around the time that .NET came out. And I really like to try to help businesses excel in their specific domains. So I've used this performance measurement framework with companies like Dixon Manufacturing. They're based out of the Maryland area. They make tons of stuff for agriculture and fire suppression, stuff like that. So hundreds of thousands of products. And of course, their website has a lot of products. So we wanted to create something that would help them be a bit more accountable. And also the California State Employee Association, which is different than the teachers union, but it's basically everyone else that works in the school system of California. Again, they have a really robust website, and we wanted to hold our project accountable. Their website actually got hacked and destroyed, and we started from scratch with them. So that was a really good experience, like kind of bringing them out of the ashes of kind of that dark place that they were in to give them a good functional website. Just since there are four of you here, I'm not going to go through the list of all the different roles. So why don't you each tell me what is your job role at work, and we'll try to focus the content of this to be a little bit more applicable to you. So I guess start here and just go around the room.
Architect, but from the roles you have there, I guess developer would be the closest.
Okay, so like solutions architect or technical architect?
Technical architect.
Okay.
It's a mixture, but somewhere between business owner, developer, project manager.
Okay.
You know,
it's okay to wear multiple hats.
Yeah.
I've literally had every job on this list. Right on. John?
Yeah, similar, business owner, developer.
Okay.
Decision, lots of DevOps.
Okay. So a bit of technical, a bit of business.
Consulting as well. So.
Right on. So you get the importance of this topic. And what do you do?
I started in UI and UX stuff, but I do business analyst things now and procurement.
It's how our careers evolve. It is. But I think the point here is we all have similar perspectives, but we also have slightly different perspectives based on how our career develops. I also want you to understand why this presentation exists and what we intend to cover here. Nothing can cover everything that you possibly need to know, and I'll make some references along the way. These slides do have speaker notes. I'm not going to read them to you because I think you want to see my eyes, not me staring at a screen, reading these things to you. But if you really do want to see that, all the speaker notes also have references, like different books that you can read, things like that. What brought this information about? It's not mine. I'm borrowing it and trying to craft it like Lego blocks into something that I can use, and you can too. We have a few documents that we'll look at as well. But the basic idea really actually comes from things like Lean Startup, and Growth-Driven Design is a HubSpot certification you can get for free. So I definitely would recommend considering looking at those things because they get you into what Lean Startup refers to as the build, measure, learn loop. And we're going to talk about that a lot in this presentation. But if somebody comes to me and says, hey, I need help with marketing, they don't spend money one time and then go away and think, hey, my marketing is forever done. It is an investment that you're constantly going after, and so is your technology or a lot of other things that you're investing in, where you can build, then you can see how it performs, and then you can learn from the measurements of that performance. But what are we actually measuring? There are so many different statements to that, so we need to narrow it down to something that helps us as a team define what success is. So that was the link to the slide. You'll see it again at the last slide. There are going to be a lot of slides. So how do we measure success? It's not just all about the hard work that we do. It's not just about the emotions that we have. We need something quantifiable. We can qualify things, but we need it to be quantitated. We need data to be able to have some sort of visual indicator. Like if I'm driving down the road, I have an indicator telling me how fast I'm going and whether or not I might get in trouble for going too fast. Well, KPIs are like that. We need to understand, are we going fast enough, are we going too fast? And that's not the only source of information, but it's like going to the doctor and getting your vitals. That's a start of a conversation. So the KPIs aren't about all the information. It's just keeping a bird's eye view on the things that we establish as the most important. And we want to put those KPIs into a framework. Otherwise, they're just numbers. And we need to understand what's the meaning behind it. What do we intend to do with that? So that's the point behind the performance measurement framework, is actually having a purpose. And I'm sure since you've worked as consultants and business owners and developers, you've taken instructions from people and they say, go build this thing. Are we asking why? Are we participating in that why? Do we even know what success looks like? What if I'm building something and I didn't participate in that? I built it, I'm proud of my work, and I deliver it, and it's not helping the business succeed. It's not helping the audience feel good about their experience. Well, we all fail together. So let's not just turn wrenches. By the way, if you've never seen this movie, Big Trouble Little China, it's fantastic, Kurt Russell. So instead of turning wrenches, we need to learn to grow as people, as a team, and with informed solutions. So where do we start? Well, I think it's important to first start off with a hypothesis. I'm talking to you today trying to convince you that this is the way to go to help define success, but I have a responsibility to prove my hypothesis and at least tell you what my hypothesis is. So the basic idea is we want to have some sort of way of measuring our success that we agree upon ahead of time before we get committed, and we can use that to prioritize our work. You have lots of choices of what you can build and focus your attention on, but how can we narrow that down based on what we agree resembles some sort of success? And then learn from that as a team using data. Now, the idea of lean startup focuses really heavy on the build, measure, learn cycle. So in between each one, you have something you build, that's what you produce. You have a measurement, and you can review that, that's the data. And that helps you learn, make recommendations, and then that comes up with more ideas to continue the loop yet again. But we can't just jump here and just start building stuff and hope for the best. We gotta come up with this first part, and that's what this presentation's about, is that first part, so we can effectively get here and not waste money, time, people's sanity. In the Lean Startup, they also talk about, and this isn't across the board applicable to every project, but this is a good way to put it on the rails. They talk about different growth engines. And typically you're not in all of these growth engines. So for example, a viral engine of growth is exactly what it sounds like. You're gaining attention, and through one person telling several people, you're gaining more attention. So there are certain projects that really thrive on that ability to spread word of mouth. So you might have a political website spreading word of mouth. You can have paid engine of growth, and this is usually startups will have a lot of money going into advertising or marketing. And then sticky engine of growth might be like, I just told you about the California State Employee Association. Well, they have members, but they don't have infinite number of members, so you hit a capacity, but you also have the idea of attrition. So monitoring those coefficients, those values, lets you understand, are you healthy? Are you not healthy? So when we establish a KPI, we can actually align one or two of them to one of these engines of growth, but it's not exclusive to that. It's just one of the ideas to possibly consider. So why a performance measurement framework? I think that's always a place to really start. And I think it's because we've all been, or I would presume, we've been in situations where there's not enough team understanding of what our purpose is, what success is. There's not consensus at the very beginning. So this is to try to actually work together a little bit more effectively. And I think we also need to demonstrate, because we have to be accountable for our work, what impact we're actually having through measurements. And that we're holding ourselves accountable to the goals that we defined for ourselves. So whether you work for a department and you have a board or higher ups, this actually shows a proactive attempt to holding you and your team accountable to those sort of things, and getting stakeholders and decision makers to participate in the process too. I think it's also important to learn together. We don't want to learn in a vacuum. We want to actually learn together. And I think each of you have a different perspective. You might have an overlap, and that's great because it helps us communicate, but you also bring something unique to the table. Your career experience, your daily life, what your preferences are, all of those things kind of shape how it is that you can learn together and bring something to the table. So what's actually involved? Well, a successful performance measurement framework includes clear key performance indicators and what we refer to as key system attributes. And we'll talk about what that actually means. But those are the key characteristics of what you would see in a performance measurement framework. The key system indicators, we'll look at a few examples, but it all starts with this. This is what we're going to look at, whether it's, my blood pressure or the profit that we're earning off of an e-commerce website, or the registrations for event registration. And key system attributes are at first the hypotheses that we have about, if we build it this way, then that should help move the indicator. And we can be wrong. That's what a hypothesis is, but it's at least starting somewhere. So what's the idea for what we build? So maybe if we build some sort of an event registration system or integrate with one, we just built something, now let's go test it to see if we're changing the numbers. And then documenting both of those things and something that captures that idea together. So this will help with guiding the growth that your team can establish together. And that's that growth cycle that we were just talking about, the build, measure, learn cycle. But I'm talking in abstracts. We want to take a look at something a little bit more concrete here. And I think any agency especially, or any department that's about to invest in what these currently abstract efforts look like, need to understand what's my investment initially and ongoing. So it depends. Like if I was working with a small restaurant sort of website, it might not even have the budget or the need to have such an intense thing. But if I'm working with a university, if I didn't do these sort of things, that would be devastating to our ability to work well together. So I'd argue the initial effort of talking to key stakeholders, subject matter experts, the team as a whole, and gathering some consensus for what a key performance indicator might be, what a key system attribute might be that supports each, that takes roughly about 20 hours. Now, that can give or take, but it's important for us to account and budget for that, especially if you're an agency with billable work, because clients don't want to spend money that they don't understand the value of. And that's the point, of course, of defining these things. And then, well, what do we do with it after that? Well, you can certainly establish key performance indicators by definition, and we'll look at a few. And then just use that to prioritize your work. I think we've all worked in Jira with a backlog of what can we do? Well, if you look at your KPIs to help dictate, like as a business analyst, what is priority number one in terms of what we build? Sure, there are dependencies, and that's a factor, but the priority should also be, how are we trying to bring the most value to the website or whatever it is that we're building to make a difference? And I think that has to be a part of the conversation, and KPIs help at least establish that. So who's involved? We're talking about process. Who actually comes to the table with this? And really, if you're an agency or a department, so clients is more of an agency thing, but if you are a department, still, just starting off with KPIs I think is good for the small projects. Or if you're a little bit larger, like the university, that's when you have this full process where not only are you establishing a definition of what KPIs are, you're monitoring them through some sort of a dashboard, you're meeting on a recurring basis. And again, we'll look at that in a second, but just a little groundwork. So stakeholders are really important. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a project, I'm sure you're familiar, where a stakeholder comes so late in the project, it's like a table flip. It's very disruptive to the ability to make progress with the things that we're building and planning to do, because they have some vital information about how something needs to be represented for the organization, something about the audience, something about the technology. So we want to gather stakeholders very early in the process, help them establish what success looks like, and navigate what sort of solutions should, in theory, pair with that definition of success. Subject matter experts, and of course, test and live users. I think all too often we kind of work, again, in a vacuum as a team, as a development team or design team, and we're not reaching out to the users early enough to try to validate some of these ideas. If I put a form on the website of a movie theater to sign up for a private event, like a wedding party or something like that, do people even use it? Well, we can survey them and involve them. And of course, if we establish a team of people to monitor this data, who are they? Well, we should document who they are, so that way when we have recurring meetings, we include them. So there's an intake process that we'll typically go through just to get started. So I keep talking about KPIs and KSAs and all these words. That doesn't probably mean anything to you until you understand how it is that they're developed. So the process that I personally like to take is kind of this Venn diagram. First, let's focus on the business needs and the goals, like what are you trying to accomplish? Sometimes those things are really critical for the health and the survival of the business. And in other cases, they might be kind of stretch goals, but just open conversation. And also user needs. That's kind of the other side of the Venn diagram is what do people actually need? What's their behavior? And then try to overlap those. In some cases, what the business wants, the users are unaware of, and that's a discovery issue. So that's, okay, we're trying to raise awareness for our audience to understand, here's something that we offer. Or it's the other way around. The users want something, and maybe you don't want to offer it strategically, or you don't even know they want it. And that's an opportunity. So just establishing an understanding of that and coming back to this to understand it a little bit further. But these are things that kind of head in the direction of, well, how do we measure success? Without knowing that context, how do you do that? Data sources are important too. Maybe you have a CRM. Maybe you have some sort of an event registration system. Maybe you have Google Analytics or YouTube, some sort of system that has data that says something that you want to measure. And whenever we talk about measurements, we want to establish a data authority. Like, I don't want 3 different sources for the same information, because what if they're out of sync? That's not good if you're actively monitoring those things. So just at least understanding that ahead of time. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll send out an intake survey for stakeholders. Just a few example questions. You can craft these however you want. I'll usually use like Google Form or SurveyMonkey, depending on the sort of fidelity that we have. But you can get a lot of jump starting into these workshops that you can do with stakeholders by first asking them this. And more importantly, surveys kind of are on a one-to-one basis sometimes. So you might get consensus or even differentiation that you can evaluate with the stakeholders and say, some people said this, other people said that. Let's talk about that. Let's understand why aren't you saying the same thing, or why is there consensus? Is that typical? So once you have gone through the intake process, then you want to triage that information. So you want to take a look at your notes. We need to distill this to some sort of an artifact that we can use. So we'll take a look at our intake notes. We'll start to use a worksheet to put that together. So let's look at that worksheet. Let's do a little show and tell. So I think I mentioned this earlier. I worked in a movie theater. It's one of the better examples that I can give. I think that's really, really small, so let's make that not so small. There we go. So some goals that we talk about in the movie theater when we met with key stakeholders. They want to increase profits because they're a profit business. And what's their target that they've established? Well, they want to target about 20% profits over the year with a stretch goal of 25. Now, not every business knows these things, and that's okay. You just start the conversation. Maybe they want to improve the attendance ratio. Maybe people buy tickets and don't show up. That's not good for business. How can you spread word about how good this movie theater is? Or concession sales. It's ridiculous how much concession sales make a difference in the movie theater business. And reducing concession costs too also has to come up, because if I'm spending less and making more, it's that balance. So this will come up sometimes when you establish KPIs. Is if I said I want to reduce customer service calls, but I also want to improve customer satisfaction. Well, some brilliant executive may come along and say, take the phone number off the website. Well, you've reduced calls. Our KPI went up, great. But the other KPI went down because we're not improving customer satisfaction. So it's important to establish KPIs that can be seen together. And that's why kind of evaluating these things gets you closer to figuring out how that overlap occurs. I personally like to ask about income and expenses because I want to help income and not, I want to help income, not hurt it, and I want to reduce expenses when there's the possibility of doing so. Sometimes when you build a website, it can cost money, especially if there's subscriptions, things like that. Maybe there's something they're paying for now, and there's just a newer technology that's either free or just better. So I think those are opportunities. We don't have to get too deep in it, and for some clients I've worked with, they don't want to even touch the subject, but it's just an opportunity. Now, audience, who even is the audience? Now, if you've got a website, you might start saying anyone, the public, and you might say administrator or content manager. The ones that I really care about, moviegoers, family, college students, advertisers, sponsors, maybe. I mean, are we trying to get sponsors and advertisers at the theater on the website? That has to be a part of the conversation, I think. I remind people that conversion funnels are an essential part of not just marketing, just what a person's doing on the website. What is the purpose of your website? So in this case, I said, maybe I'm selling tickets on the website. Maybe I'm booking events. Maybe I want to have a reward program to get more people in during the summer or something like that. Or maybe I want to have people become an advertiser or a sponsor. And we can establish some of these critical activities that might inform what features we want to build. So the point of this is getting to this stage where we want to say, well, what is the key performance indicator based on what we just talked about? Typically with key performance indicators, you don't want more than 6 because then it's not key anymore. Then it's just metrics. And it's okay to have metrics. We can establish things that we can put in a dashboard and say, for this context, we need to talk a little bit more about that. But the needle, the heartbeat, the blood pressure that we want to monitor, in this case, profits, maybe that comes from QuickBooks. Remember the data sources we were talking about? Well, maybe QuickBooks is the data authority for that. Customer satisfaction, if you're not familiar with Net Promoter Scores, that's just a standard way of measuring satisfaction. It's not the only way. You can have smiley faces. But some sort of way that you determine establishes a connection with your audience that's friendly to use, gathers data, and more importantly, is something that you can monitor. Hotjar is really good with Net Promoter Scores, but there are other things that you can use as well. Attendance ratio, maybe QuickBooks. Again, this is a movie theater. Maybe that's what they choose. Could be Salesforce or other things. Concession sales. Now, we remember we said the engines of growth. So repeat attendance, I think there's some opportunities to explore that, but maybe we're not mature enough to do that. And that's okay. We don't need to define all the perfect KPIs our first go around. So we can come back to these things and dial them in a little bit. Cost of acquisition. So we've got sticky engine of growth, paid engine of growth. So it's just more of an idea to keep on the table as something that maybe will help us monitor the health in a way that aligns with a growth engine. And then concession costs. We decided as a team, no, we're not gonna monitor it. But we discussed it. We distilled this information. We documented it so that way we can know our choices. And then we talked about key system attributes as well. These are the features that we can build on the website to hopefully prop up the KPIs. And I have a couple columns here too, where did the team approve this? Well, if yes, then we have to get ready to start designing that and building and planning for it. And if not, then maybe later. Key system attributes can change at any time. You can make decisions, especially if you're basing it on research. And validate it. The idea is you can say if I build call to action links on the homepage, that will help my ticket sales and book events. But do I know that? So I go build it and I should test it. Maybe we have tested it and we mark that. So that way, as we work together, we can use this worksheet to kind of high level plan what it is that we're doing. You don't have to use a worksheet. This is just an example. Use whatever you're comfortable with. So that's really all that the worksheet does, is it helps you organize what you did in a conversation. So use a worksheet. So that's the general structure. Here's a link if you want to take a look at what that example looks like. Again, the slides will link to that. So again, we're gathering the business goals and analyzing them. We're talking about income sources and expenses. We're documenting any conversion funnels, which is not strictly a marketing thing. It's just what are the steps in the process that ends up needing to be completed where people can fall out of the process. And then we have an opportunity to improve that sort of thing through study and testing. Any critical activities that maybe do, maybe don't support the conversion funnels. Audience segments that we need to support and serve. And then coming up with the ideas for the KPIs and KSAs, key system attributes. So the document, well, once we've gone through the work, now we're trying to establish kind of like a charter, some place to say this is our intention and our definition of those things. So that way any stakeholder, especially if they're new, they're not going through that whole process that we just went through. We can do that again if we absolutely must. Maybe they can take a look at the artifacts if they're curious, because we do want to show our math. But there are aspects of this document, and this is the main artifact. This is what we're kind of, this is our campfire. The artifact for the performance measurement framework is the KPIs themselves, the KSIs. We want to define the data sources and how it is that we measure things. That way we're consistent. If we need to calibrate that, we can. List any hypothetical and validated key system attributes. And define a reporting structure. Understand who participates and create a schedule for those reviews. And ideally, you might use something like Looker Studio to develop a KPI tracking dashboard. So when you have board members or other decision makers or executives that are holding you accountable, you've already done all your work. You're not showing them all the behind the scenes sort of stuff. You're showing them the brass tacks of here's where we are. And then they can participate in the observations and recommendations side of things, but at least you're being accountable in that. So the document, I know that's just the setup, the document that we want to create, again, the movie theater, if you will, it just starts off with a quick introduction. Here's what a PMF is, summarizing what we've talked about so far. We don't define objectives and key results here. That can be a part of something different. But the idea is you get to a point with KPIs that they're mature, they're established, because if you're analyzing data over a year, 2 years, you don't want to constantly be changing them. You want consistency. It doesn't mean that they can't change, and we'll talk about that in a bit. It just means that you want to try to avoid it, so that way you can establish data trends to tell you, is your heart rate going up or down? Is your blood pressure rising? And what does that mean in terms of decision making over longer forms of time? OKRs might be a bit more of a PM sort of tool in a moment of time. Those can definitely change. So what are the KPIs? Profits, customer satisfaction, attendance ratio, concession sales. So we define the profits as, okay, we've got our data source, we've got our goal. So when we see that needle moving, we've established this as a team, and that's great. Net promoter scores have a pretty well understood industry standard targets. This can be more particular to your use case and go against those standards. But this is a statement that I always like to give people when we're not sure and we haven't measured something is be reluctant, be a little bit restrained. Don't judge the data when you see it. Don't overreact. Just understand how the data trends unfold over time. And just because you change something on the website and you see the needle move, that correlation may not be the causation. So it's us being a little bit more responsible. In the attendance ratio, we established that. But concession sales, we have no idea. So it's okay to say statements like this at the very beginning of the document where we'll just inform it after we establish enough data to see what those trends look like. The key system attributes, maybe we've tested and proven that calls to action help with finding movies, buying tickets, and booking events. But maybe we still need to test some of these other things to see if they actually help with the KPIs. So we want enough information to see, are people saying that they're likely to do something that will impact those KPIs based on these things that we built? If not, it's okay to remove features from a website. I know we get married and emotionally attached to them sometimes, and we want to keep all those things, but the less you have to maintain, the less it costs to maintain. So again, this can hold us accountable. We talk about learning, build, measure, learn. Well, what are we learning? Well, it requires a team to learn together. So I think it's important to document who's involved. Now, this is just an example document, but be specific here. Know who is on your team, so that way you know when you're scheduling meetings that these people should be present to be representative of those perspectives. If they're out on vacation, schedule it for another time, so that way, again, there's more of that round table discussion, if you will. The measurement report, you could put a link to any Looker Studio sort of dashboard. I did not create one. I'm sure you've seen KPI dashboards before, and if not, you can use Google to find those as well. But the idea here is that maybe the executives or whoever we're answering to, they don't want to go through this conversation. They don't want to talk about these things. They just want it distilled down to a report. So you can do that. Have your dashboard, put your findings in there as a team, and then present those findings. I think it's important to distinguish when you do these reports the difference between observations, data, it's factual, from recommendations. And we'll talk about what that means in terms of the report in a moment. And then the measurement schedule. I like to try to find a cadence for these meetings where maybe month over month, we're just saying that, okay, is the data being collected? Is there anything alarming that we must react to, but typically not? But is it just heading in the right direction? Are we good? It's not really a scrum meeting. It's more a matter of, are the KPIs and the KSAs, are we having movement as a team there? Quarterly is more of the, what have we done in the past 3 months? What's the data telling us? What's our short-term investments over the next quarter? And then yearly is the exact same thing, but a whole year. What happened over the past year, especially with businesses that have seasonality? Those are really important. What are we intending to invest our time in the next year? So that's the document, but this isn't really telling you what to fully do with this. So as a team, you've established these and you've reviewed them as a team, so that way you've at least documented it. Again, it's a charter. It's not telling you how to behave together. It's just simply giving you collaboration and consensus. You need to make revisions. We had a couple spots in there that said, I don't know what our target is, so come back to it as a team and revise that. It's your main definition. Your key performance indicators, they're going to influence your design decisions. So I think it's really important to kind of take a step back from just the data and understand what each of us bring to the table in terms of user experience, or business acumen, and try to bring that into the design itself to try to affect those KPIs, especially if we just don't know. Educated guess. Key system attributes, again, they're hypotheses until we test them. And when we measure KPIs, again, the data authority matters. So if you have a dashboard, sometimes that requires an API to connect with things. Sometimes you have to import from like an export CSV file, like from QuickBooks or something. Just understand what that process is. So that way, anybody going month over month, it's easy, it's established, you can do it, it's repetitive. You don't want inconsistencies month over month because then it's hard to track. The target goals and the stretch goals, ultimately, we want to establish those. We want to validate any KSAs when we can and identify roundtable participants. We want to make sure that we're on a schedule so that way we're being proactive, not reactive to the data. We're not being so hasty and emotional about things, but we're bringing it back down to the data and also the opportunities that we have. So clearly define your objectives, and this is going to be particular to each team, but again, the example can give you a rough framework so that way you can start. So, okay, now we've established all this. Now what? Well, let's put it into action. So it's important to configure those data sources. If they're not ready to go, then 100% of the data that you're not collecting, you can't retroactively go back and collect in most cases. So we want to make sure that we're collecting data early. Create that KPI dashboard and calibrate it. Make sure that it's actually working. Test it month over month. Don't rely on it until you can as a team, until you get that consensus. And schedule the data updates. Sometimes it's not real time that these things are pooling, and that's okay. That's what those monthly meetings are. Maybe you just create a report every month, so that way you're doing those data updates, and there's someone responsible. And then when you review them, you want to schedule those team meetings, put them in everyone's calendar, make adjustments when you know people are out or sick, and do first an internal evaluation, especially if you're an agency and things are client-facing. I think it's important to kind of roll back a little bit and not necessarily show them all of the sausage making, if you will, that got you to the point of like, here's what the data is, here's our recommendations. Do a little bit of internal review, especially if you're working with like a board member, an executive whose time is at a premium. You don't want to waste their time kind of dragging them through it. They have a very short attention span for a reason. And then prepare it in a presentation. Make it look good. So, and once you do this the first time, you've got a template. Then you can just update it month over month. Gather your measurements. Like we said, it could come from a manual source. That's fine. But I can't stress this enough. You want to separate observations from recommendations. But then once you get into, resist reacting. Once you get into looking at that data, try to also say, well, here's what happened. Show diagrams and try to create some sort of a narrative, which can introduce bias. And again, that's why you have a team. So that way you can work together. If somebody spots a bias, you can kind of try to counteract that. And you can make recommendations based on your observations. And those recommendations kind of fall in a few different categories. So first off, are the measurements accurate? Maybe we've been collecting data for a few months and we're noticing some odd quirks. Maybe our algebra is wrong, maybe our data source isn't collecting things as we expected it to, and you might need to make some adjustments. So those first few months, the recommendation might just be calibration. You know, is this representing things correctly? So that's that reluctance to react. So another recommendation is to test and validate what you built. So, okay, you built it, but you want to fail early. You don't want to invest a little bit in something and then just keep doubling down on it because it feels good. You want the data to actually show that. And the data is not just the KPIs, it's through user testing and other validation. But there's also times when you don't really know what the data means. So you might need to look deeper at other data sources. So maybe we're taking a look at the event registrations, and something's just not working. People are falling off in the conversion funnel at a specific point, and we're not getting the registrations. So you might scratch your head and say, well, maybe we can test this. Maybe let's run a user test to see, is there a usability issue with this? That's just a simple example, but identify opportunities to learn as a team without knowing. It's the you don't know what to know, you don't know, but try to find questions that you can attempt to answer with external sources. And then you may know what you want to build. You may have a good idea, whether it's for a key system attribute or just even an A/B test. But this is the work that your developers and your designers would be taking a look at. So when I say backlog, a lot of times people will think, oh, that's what the devs do. But designers get work too. So we can include them in what we're referring to as backlog recommendations. And again, I can't stress it enough. We're trying to encourage this build, measure, learn loop. We build it, we see how it's working, and then we learn together, and then we repeat the whole process together. And that should typically follow the cadence that you'll see either in your sprint cycles. That's the ideal, if you can build, measure, learn in that cycle, or in your releases. Releases can take multiple sprints sometimes, so it just depends on where you are. And once you enter that cycle, you're pretty much locked in a lot of times, and you start to develop a chemistry with your team, and everybody starts to typically get used to this way of working. And if people come in new, you can explain this process to them. But sometimes a business changes, sometimes an industry changes, and sometimes people change that we're serving. So let's take COVID. Who was going to a movie theater during COVID? What are we going to do about that? So sometimes the business needs to change to meet that where it is, or the audience might be reluctant. What are we doing as a company to help people? Sometimes there isn't an answer, but sometimes there is. And that's when we can pivot. That's when we go back and we change the strategy. So that's why that line goes back up to the top. Let's do everything that we just talked about with the intake. Go back through it, put it through its paces, and see, is there a fundamental change to the KPIs and what we have here? So I say KPIs don't really change, but that's an example of when. It should be exceedingly rare. But we say all that to come to this fundamental point, is what we can learn together. It's not about pointing fingers and emotions. It's simply just about how can we enrich ourselves and our team's understanding of what it is that we can do. We all bring something unique. That's the human experience. But knowledge is not the only thing. It's also about practice. So regardless of the subject, at some point you didn't know about it, and then you encounter it, and then you become a little more acquainted and become familiar, but maybe it's just in passing. Eventually you might choose to study something, but through study gains you knowledge. We want to gain experience, and that's through practice. So if this is an approach that helps you, take a look at things like growth-driven design, read Lean Startup, learn more about Agile development, and try to incorporate those practices in what you do if you don't already do that. And of course, attend events like this, find a mentor. If you just feel a little bit disconnected from this, that's okay, especially if it's an unfamiliar topic. So some different books to consider if you want some additional learning is Lean Startup. There's also the Startup Way by the same author. There's a few different related trainings. There's the Growth-Driven Design HubSpot certification. There's actually one for an individual and another one for agencies, which was kind of an interesting development. The one for individuals like 4 hours of training, and the one for agencies like 17, something like that. But growthdrivendesign.com if you're curious. And Agile practices, again, understanding how to manage backlogs effectively. And if you don't do anything with the PMF document, at least you've established that. So if you did want to start it at some point, that's great. But if you only had KPIs, at least that helps you prioritize your backlog. If a client says, hey, I'd like to do this, and you already have stuff in your backlog, you can say, okay, here's what we have, here's what you're asking me to do. This KPI, we know that these two things will really help, or at least that we think, and we discuss that with you, but this other thing that you're bringing in, can you help us associate that with the KPI, or does it? Or is this just, you want to use AI on the website because it sounds good? So it's the hammer looking for the nail sort of problem. We want to hold ourselves accountable, and KPIs can do that just by themselves. The definition alone can do that. So the example documents I have, again, those are the two links for the spreadsheet and the document. It's meant to be simple. We don't want this to be so heavy and require a PhD to understand this, or an MBA. So thanks for participating. This is me. I'm always looking for work as a contractor, so if you or anyone you know needs help from someone like me, I've worn almost every hat, please get in touch. That's the link to the slides there, and that's my email address. So any questions? All right. Good stuff. Thanks for attending.
Thank you.
Was this what you expected when you came to the presentation, or was there something different that you expected?
I'll be honest, I thought it initially, before I read the description, I just saw the title and I thought, we're going to learn how to measure performance of the application.
Oh, yes. And a lot of times that is a highly valid metric that you'll be taking a look at when it comes to the overall goal. Like, some of the metrics that I really love are usability focused, like how fast is your page load time? And, obviously things like Lighthouse can help with that. But it's true, like if somebody feels like the page isn't responding, they're just going to go away. They feel like they did something wrong sometimes. And in other cases, it might be even more than just usability. It might be a practical step of your conversion funnel.
Yeah, we're embarking on kind of like a theme of website effectiveness in general. So that's what I was thinking. It was just seeing what you're focused on, what you're doing here. But it's exactly that, identifying what the metrics are across all the different areas of what makes a website effective.
Yeah.
So.
It's holding it more responsible. Yeah.
What makes a good metric?
No, that's a really solid question. So I'll make a distinction. A KPI is a very special type of metric, but what makes a good metric is something where you have a reliable data source and people can understand it with additional context. So if I said page views, you know what that is. I think that's a good metric. But by itself, it doesn't tell you a story, and it doesn't tell you enough to react. And people are very eager to react. And in lean startup, especially, this is my favorite word to describe page views and bounce rates. They're vanity metrics. They're buzzwords in our industry. It doesn't mean that they aren't valuable. They just need context to be useful. Because if I have a high bounce rate, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe there's a link on it that sends them to a completely different web page or website, and that was by design. Well, then it's working as expected. It's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. So I think context really helps when it comes to take a look at metrics. But key performance indicators, just like blood pressure or temperature, these are things that really get to the core of, is this website healthy? And that isn't just a matter of, like you said, performance or vanity metrics or things like that. It's more a matter of, is it helping our audience and is it helping our business? And if we work through these steps, well, we should know the answer to that. And they're not the only source of information. They're just a starting point for the conversation. So you may look at, for example, we were talking about event tickets or movie theater tickets. Well, if I'm not seeing that needle go up on movie theater tickets, I might actually want to take a look at page views on the home page. And then is a ticket purchase on the same page? Probably not. So I click on something. Is somebody falling off at a certain point? So those are things that we can study through other data points and other metrics and kind of put that together, whether it's Google Analytics or Hotjar, taking a look at a funnel and seeing where that fall off might be happening.
Are your example spreadsheets linked to in the slideshow?
Yep.
Okay.
So I'll just pull that back up. So the worksheet, it's just a Google sheet. That goes right there. It's available to the public. And that PMF document, that's also available to the public. That's a Google Doc. So it's something that you can easily copy, gut it for what it is, and fill it in with your own information and just take it from there. But in the spirit of open source, I like to share these sort of things because I built this based on open industry information. I mean, it's something that anybody can learn. But
Do you have any strategies to help bring reluctant stakeholders to the table?
oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, I think the best thing to do, and it's different for different personalities. I think first off, I want to understand the reluctance. So root cause analysis is a lot of times where I'll start, is the why are you reluctant? And I don't want to ever call somebody out in a group setting. So if I said, why are you reluctant? And other people are, waiting to hear you talk, you might feel a little bit embarrassed for what you say and kind of camouflage the real reason. And that doesn't help me understand your answer any better. So I think a one-to-one conversation can really help. And sometimes stepping around that, depending on how somebody responds, is to understand, okay, well, what are you responsible for? Like, who do you answer to? How are you accountable for the work that you're doing? Because I can help you. I can meet you where you are and see if what we're building together can support your goals. And I think sometimes people just want to be heard. They just want to have a voice. That's not to say that you don't have people who aren't really good for their job or qualified. And I personally don't think that that's the actual case in a lot of cases. There's a good book called Drive that really talks about people's motivation to do the work that they do. And it's not laziness. I think it's more a matter of they aren't making a connection to what it is that they need to do. They aren't themselves being fulfilled, so they're kind of maybe phoning it in. But it's not me to judge that. It's more me trying to figure out what are your pain points, what are your accountabilities, what do you need to accomplish to be better at what it is that you do? So I think the reluctant stakeholder issue, it starts with a one-to-one conversation and just better understanding them, giving them a place to speak safely. Yeah. All right. Anything else? Well, thank you for joining. I really appreciate it. And if you do have any other questions, definitely get in touch with me. If after you kind of think about this a little bit, if you're like, well, how do I actually apply this? Shoot me an email. I'll certainly be happy to point you in the right direction.
Thank you.
Awesome.